Chapter 4. All Hail the Boys. My early years in education are a blur at best. I do remember Jane taking me to class the first day and dropping me off in Mrs. Winger's classroom. I was 4. Then I remember being told to get off the swinging gate and take my seat. Gee, I just noticed it was empty with everybody else sitting down. Next, I remember first grade and Mrs. Burmaster telling me I couldn't sit on top of the desk, but I had to sit in the seat. I looked at her for the longest time, staring into her eyes as I slowly realized she had asked me that before. Many times before. I came home alone during these years. My sisters were supposed to come home on the bus and be with me, but my Callies or cheerleading practice or anything for that matter kept them from doing that. So I was often on my own. I didn't care. The big old house was not scary to me, and it gave me a chance to snoop or poop or whatever private activity I wanted. Dad said I should come into the house and stand very quietly at the back door for a full minute. He said just listen to the house and it will tell you if someone is hiding. He said no one can stand still long enough, and once they change their weight, the house will creak and expose them. I did this every day and felt perfectly safe after this little exercise. What I usually did was eat. I'd watched Mother making chocolate frosting, and I could do it too. I could learn so much from watching. No one spent much time teaching me things, but they did lots with their hands, so I learned to watch and be quiet so they could forget I was there. Powdered sugar, a little butter softened, a small splash of milk, and powdered chocolate. Mix, eat, clean up. Do you really think I could clean up this mess very well? I don't. She must have just turned her back on the situation. For second grade, I had Miss Tracy and her brother's name was Dick. All of us students found this rather exciting and worldly. She stood duck-footed all the time, and I so admired her stance, and I would practice it at home when my dad would holler at me and tell me to stop, or my feet would permanently stay in an outward angle. I often walked right up to her and stepped on her toes. Miss Tracy had a checkered dress she wore often and was a fairly large woman. I actually got away with calling her Chubby Checkers several times without punishment and actually got a little smirk. As I made an art project in her class, I used several sheets of colored paper, and she whispered to me that the school could not afford any more than 10 sheets per child that year, and I was using up my yearly allotment. After that, I got my mother to donate pencils. I brought in a whole box, and Miss Tracy laughed when we both realized that Mother had sent in advertisement pencils for the insurance agency. Mother never missed a beat. Miss Tracy shrugged her shoulders as we both knew she needed the pencils. Only getting 10 sheets of paper a year was a real disappointment. I knew I could get Dad to buy me more. But then I would be the only one with extra paper, and that was unacceptable to me. My Aunt Eleanor was a china painter and early on taught me some brush strokes, which I thought were pretty cool, and maybe I could be an artist. She encouraged me in that. One of our little projects was threading yarn through fabric and drawing with the yarn. Mother had extra yarn, so I took that into school. I chose a bright red yarn and a brown, and I made a tree trunk, then a perfect circle with the red for the tree body. Miss Tracy said trees are not round and their trunks are black. Now, my favorite tree was perfectly round and bright red in the fall, and it was my model. Eleanor said tree trunks are not black, but brown or gray. I felt bad and attacked by Miss Tracy. Eleanor made me feel better. It was cute, she said. If I only got 10 sheets of paper, how could I be an artist, I wondered. Well, I figured when I got to college I could take art class, and then maybe I could be an artist. I knew there was no more art after second grade, so I created that dream about college. It was a really dumb thought and even dumber goal. When I did finally get to college and signed up for art class, it didn't work out so well. It was my first real lesson on how far behind you can be after 13 years of education. I thought I could take a class and catch up. The first day of class, the professor asked us to take out our pastels and draw a face, just to show him where our skill levels were. I raised my hand and asked, "What's a pastel?" I am almost too embarrassed to write this. The professor flipped out. He started yelling about these goddamn country kids that come in here thinking they're going to be an artist. What a waste of time. I slunk out of the classroom and went over to the registrar's office and dropped out. I've always wondered if the system failed me or if I failed myself. What would have happened if I told him to go F himself and said it was his job to teach and I paid the bill, so teach? It probably would have helped if I'd shown up to class with the supplies, but I didn't understand that either. I thought you could just show up and they would teach you art. I didn't read the fine print and I didn't have the money for it anyway. Continuing in second grade, I heard that a friend's mother was having a baby and Cheryl had announced she didn't want a new baby. She wanted a puppy. My dad thought that was really cute. So at school I asked Cheryl what she wanted and sure enough she said, puppy. We laughed about it, but I couldn't wait to get home and tell my parents that sure enough, Cheryl wanted a puppy. When I was done with the story, my dad said, "Do you think Cheryl gets enough to eat?" I wanted to say no. Then he says, "Does she get good grades?" Better than me. At that point, I realized Mother had moved behind me near the kitchen, talking over me in sign language, and then said, "Bob." Just Bob. It was not what she said, but how she said it. He persisted and asked me, "Do you think she's happy?" I already told you I'm thick. I'm sitting here trying to remember the event fully because I didn't understand all the implications of the anger for that matter. I learned early in life to remember an event and work it out later. Mother just ended up by telling Dad to shut up in no uncertain terms. A few days later, I went down into the kitchen where Mother was preparing breakfast, and holding my throat, I said, "My throat hurts and I can't talk." She whipped around and she said, "You did this to me on purpose, didn't you? You knew I was going shopping today, didn't you? You gave yourself mumps, didn't you?" What? I had heard the word mumps the day before, but I didn't know what they were. How did I get them on purpose? Shopping was a big deal in the country, so I never knew when my mother went shopping. Later, I learned they would scoot off to Detroit or Hudson's for the day and try to get home before supper so no one knew. Oh, another secret, Mother? She went shopping that day and I stayed home alone. Another time I needed to remember and process later because I was being thick happened after Robert and Karen married. They were living and teaching near Bay City and had bought a bedroom set that seemed to break down quickly. Uncle Albert and Aunt Eleanor and my mom and dad were sitting around the old oak table discussing the options for returning the set. I was on the couch listening and I popped up and said, "Yeah, I hear Robert and Karen really got screwed on that mattress." Well, all you could hear was this sucking sound, and boy did they laugh. I had not a clue, and every time they looked at me, they would start laughing again. During our second grade year, they divided us out, college-bound or not. We had taken a standardized test, and it was beyond me that I had somehow passed. They didn't say it outright, but instead called the groups A and B. I got an A, and my friend Terry got a B. She looked at me and said with great sadness, "I'll never get out of here now." I will never forget her haunting eyes as she sat there afterwards. I have often wondered what happened to her. Her sister died in a one-car accident that surely involved alcohol. Her brother could repeat any song on the piano without hesitation. Their mother used to cut her hair, washing it in the kitchen sink once the dishes were done and then cutting it at the table. I loved going out there. The barber in town reported her for cutting hair without a license and she had to quit, but we still snuck out there. There was money allotted for a second grade field trip. That year our class was going to Dow Chemical for a tour. When we got there, we were ushered into a room with a production line that made a new product called saran wrap. It was really fascinating. The plastic wrap came out from between two stainless steel rollers and blew up like an oval balloon and then back into between another set of rollers. I had a man walking beside me for the tour, and I was fascinated by him. I told my dad that evening that the man had on a very expensive pair of shoes, really shiny and not like anything we saw in stores. He had on a fancy suit, as I had already a good eye for quality seamstresses and her abilities. I told my dad that he followed us everywhere, but I brought up his shoes several times. He asked me several questions and then he dropped it. Later, he told me that Dow Chemical was having corporate spies, or intellectual property theft is what we call it now. Men were following school groups with double-sided tape on the bottom of their shoes to get trace chemicals so they could reverse engineer the product. Soon after our tour, Dow Chemical shut down tours of their production lines. Second grade continued to be an interesting year. During 1961, the Catholics had Vatican II, which meant a realignment of tenets and a cleanup of the church's image. One thing they decided people needed to understand was the story of Adam and Eve. God did not actually take a rib from man and create woman. This was just a story. The day they came out, a bunch of us kids stood in the hallway counting ribs. I had just learned that they actually believed that man had one less rib, and now I was learning it was not true. So there we were, feeling each other up, counting ribs. Boys were standing in line, waiting their turn. During these years, the Catholic nuns would use the classrooms after school for religious education. One day, as school ended, and in my memory this is the same day as the rib counting, I looked up, and at the end of the hall, in front of a large picture window with light streaming in behind her, was a very large nun dressed in all the old garb. The amount of fabric she was wearing was astounding, and then that hat! Oh, that hat! I thought she was going to throw lightning bolts down the hall at us. I ran in the opposite direction of my bus just to escape her glare. I felt so lucky not to be Catholic that day. Sometimes I wanted to be Catholic, though. I liked the ritual of it all, and their church was so different from ours. They dressed nicer, got to kneel during service, and got to do that hand thing with their chest and forehead. I thought that was so cool. Their church was 3 miles north of town, right between bean and cornfields. Father Polanski would put in an ice rink every winter, and it was fun to go up there. One night, my sister Marilyn and her boyfriend invited me to go along with them, and I was quite nervous and wanted to be good and not embarrass myself because her boyfriend was so cool and had a pretty cool car. The car was new enough that it had seat belts. I'd never seen a seat belt before, so they belted me in and off we went. Well, I forgot about the seat belt, couldn't get out of the car. They were walking away and I was panicking. Help! I felt so stupid when the boy had to come back to the car and help me unbuckle the new contraption. But oh, the night was young. After getting on our skates and skating for a while, somebody told me about being Snow Queen, and you didn't have to be Catholic to be chosen. I was so excited because I wanted to be Snow Queen. I was skating around singing about snow queens and generally feeling my oats. Marilyn's girlfriend grabbed me by the arm and made me skate over to the corner of the rink, telling me that I did not want to be Snow Queen. I was like, why not? Sounds like fun. I was thinking white flowing dress, maybe new skates, a nice bonnet. She squeezed my arm a little and said, no, you do not want to be Snow Queen because the priest gets to check you out down there, as she points to her crotch. What? What the hell does that mean? My pee hole? Check out my pee hole? Why? How? Oh, my tune changed right there, and I did not bring it up again. I have many friends who attended Catholic schools in their youth, and one friend, Dennis, swears he has arthritis in his hands from being hit so often by the ruler. Another friend had a nun be particularly nice to her and caught her one day in the hallway to talk. My friend liked this nun, was happy to talk. Sister Kathy told her, Shannon, you can ask me anything. I can ask you anything, Sister Kathy? Yes, of course. So with the purest of hearts, she repeated something she had just heard on the playground and asked Sister Kathy, What's a blowjob? Smack! Sister Kathy slapped her across the face right then and walked away. Later, under tears of laughter, her sister told Shannon to ask her questions first and not Sister Kathy. Another one of my Catholic friends suffered with too little information for life. She got her job at Kmart in Saginaw right after high school, and she was very detail-oriented and worked in the office during business hours. One day she got a phone call asking if the man's friend was in the store and could she please make an announcement. This is not something you hear anymore, as we all have cell phones and we could just call each other. She kindly agreed and asked the gentleman's name. The man on the phone said, Jack me off! Barb announced it to the store and no one answered the call. She told the man on the phone that, no one is coming. He asked if she could make the announcement again. She did it again, and again she returned to the phone and said, no one is coming. The man convinced her to do it a third time. A worker came out of the back room and explained to her why no one was coming. She could have died from embarrassment, but that's what a good Catholic education gets you. So much of my life revolved around funerals. When Grandmother Lottie died, she was laid out at home with a casket in the corner of the parlor. By the time my grandfather on my maternal side died a dozen years later, we used a funeral home. The director was Walt Harmon, and I knew him well from all the funerals in Sunday school. He was a great man with a lively personality. He drove the kindergarten bus and would pick up my neighbor Mary Lou and I from under the great sugar maple tree. When the bus arrived, you had to scoot down a rather sharp embankment and climb into the bus. We had a short bus, but even shorter than the short buses now. Our assigned seats were in the front seat beside Walt. He would reach across us to shut the door. I loved riding with Walt, even when he cut corners short and bounced us all around. He would laugh as we all screamed, but we knew it was all in fun. We would accuse him of digging up new business for himself. He worked closely with the Methodist Church across the street and helped the preachers however he could, from the pulpit to the maintenance of the building. He used the church for funerals, and they all worked closely together, meeting the spiritual needs of the community. One Sunday, I found myself sitting in the front row of church with two other little girls. We were all born within a few months of each other. One was Cheryl, and the other was a girl that came up from the city and stayed with her grandmother around the corner from the church. Her grandmother was a Westerby, but I cannot recall the girl's name. As we sat there listening to Walt from the pulpit, I could feel everyone looking at us intensely. Even Walt was having a hard time not staring. I felt all creeped out. What made us so interesting other than our cute dresses and haircuts? Cheryl attended the Presbyterian church from then on, and the little Westerby child I never saw again. Bummer. I thought I'd have two girlfriends, and just like that, they were gone. Walt used to upset Mother with his bill-paying schemes. He had a furniture store in town and sold a little furniture once in a while. He would get behind in his insurance payment and pay my dad with furniture. Over the years, we got a turquoise rotating chair that's iconic 1965. Mother hated the chair, but I loved it. Soon after, we got an orange rocker and a matching brown rocker. Yeah, brown was nice, but we preferred the orange. The orange chair sat in the sunroom where Dad sat every morning and smoked a cigarette at 5 a.m. watching the trucks pull through town. Coming from the east, they would have to stop the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill and then shift 32 times to get up moving and make it up the hill in front of our house. Coming from the west, they had to stop at the tracks and then shift a ton to get up the hill and through town with no momentum. He loved this and dreamed of sitting down at the bottom of the driveway and just following someone on their day. Or he'd pick out a traveler and say, "Let's follow them." He must have been as bored as I was. Another thing Walt gave Dad was an electric 2.5 octave organ. I enjoyed it, but I couldn't play it with Mother home because she disliked the noise. One little trip Mother and I used to make was out to Irene Ruggles' farm to buy eggs. She had a large, clean chicken coop and usually had a dozen or so clean eggs in the house. Once in a while, she would have to run out to the coop and gather up a dozen or so eggs in her apron. We usually carried the cartons back and forth, automatically recycling them in the flow of life. Irene had the longest hair in her old age. One night we were late, and Irene already had her pajamas on and her hair combed out. It reached her mid-thighs, but it was always braided up and wrapped around her head in a halo my whole life. I probably stood there staring, as I had never seen it any other way than very neatly circling her head. My third grade teacher was very old, and I loved her so very much. She was a spinster, Miss Battle. She died halfway through the year, and no one told me. We got Mrs. Parrott as a long-term sub, and I disliked her. She stunk. She never wore deodorant, shaved, or I swear brush her teeth. She liked me, so she would stand over my shoulder and help me. Oh, God, no, please. Where is Miss Battle? During that spring, we would pick rocks out of the bean and cornfields with my neighbor's kids, the Hendersons. Rocks appeared each year from frost heave. As the ground freezes, it pushes the rocks up towards the surface. It seems like they should sink, but just the opposite happens. So you have fresh little rocks appear every spring, and every few years they have to be picked up. I knew Dad loved pudding stones, so I had my eye out for some. During the morning, I found a nice big pudding stone and saved it near the tail of the wagon. All of us kids saved one or two, no big deal. Well, it's not a big deal until you're headed home, cruising along in the wagon, enjoying the breeze, laughing about Robert going a little too fast when, bam, the tongue breaks. All of us in the wagon stopped right there and the tractor kept on a-going. I can still see my brother's backside quickly leaving us behind. All the extra rocks made this real special. Life suddenly was all rocks, kids, blood, screaming, and finally my brother returning to the scene of the crime. We all hobbled home, no breaks in bones or cuts that needed or would get medical attention. We were fine, according to Mother. Dad said later, "You shouldn't make a tongue out of wood cut crossways." One of the other ways we were involved in world affairs were the jet planes that trained out of Michigan. Our farmhouse was exactly on the flight path from Kinchlow Air Force Base just southwest of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, down to Selfridge Air Force Base near Mount Clemens, Michigan, which is near the Detroit River. They zipped over us and would hit the sonic boom every time. I would hear them coming and run out as fast as I could out into the bean field and see them pass overhead. You had a better chance if you were already outside. They passed so low I could wave at the pilots and see their faces. You had to be really quick, and I loved the game, and I saw their faces several times just as clear as a bell. Dad said he was contacted by the Air Force for permission to use our 2-track to the pond for an emergency landing strip. He and I laughed about this because it was so ruddy and hilly a plane at that speed wouldn't have a chance of surviving the landing. But he agreed, and of course I was thrilled at the thought of our lowly farm being an emergency landing strip. These were the years after World War II and the Korean War, and just as Vietnam was heating up for us. The French were pulling out and we were engaging. Our farm lay on that direct line between Kinchlow and Selfridge. Kinchlow was named for Ivan Kinchlow, the first pilot to fly over 100,000 feet. In fact, he flew 130,000 feet, and our scientists started to learn about the layers of atmosphere. He died in a freak accident out in Nevada. He flew an F-104 Starfighter, and I doubt I ever saw them, as he died in 1958, and I would have been just 4 and not running out to the fields to be seen by a fighter pilot. Other planes from the time was the F-94B, a first-generation Starfighter, or the F-84 Thunderjet, F-86 Sabri, or the F-89 Scorpion. In 1960, they changed to the F-106 Delta Dart and the F-102A Delta Dagger. This seems more like the era I would have experienced than the jets I would have seen. The Air Force Base near Detroit was named for Thomas E. Selfridge. Thomas E. Selfridge was an assistant to Alexander Graham Bell and died in a plane accident in 1908 while flying with Orville Wright at Fort Myers in Virginia. I found this so fascinating as a kid. Another day, Dad and I were home alone when the house got hit, and I mean hit hard. It felt like a car had rammed into our house, and Dad and I just looked at each other in wonderment. We looked all around the house, arriving at the backside to discover we had been hit all right from the sky. Some commercial plane had pulled their shit lever and dumped their load over the fields but missed and hit our house instead. I wanted Dad to call the airport and report it, but he didn't. Later, he realized the shit had embedded into the storm windows and the siding. He should have called and had it all replaced. He assumed the first storm would wash the house off, but it did not, and many years later, you could still see the impact spots. The next school year came, and I assumed my beloved Miss Battle would return. I excitedly ran up and down the halls, looking into each room, searching for her. After the bell rang, a kid grabbed me by the shirt collar and wanted to know what the heck I was doing. I told him I was looking for Miss Battle. He gave me a quizzical look and said, "She died last spring." I was crushed. I slowly walked back into my new classroom with Mrs. Wallace and sat down. I could not hear a word she said. I just sat there in my own sadness. God, I hate this place. What do I have to learn to get the hell out of here? Now, Mrs. Wallace held her own pocket of scary. Her husband. Their farm was straight south of us by 1 mile as the crow flies. Mr. Wallace also owned the acreage behind our 40 acres on the other side of the creek. He had a large hill back there that we called Wallace's Mountain, and it was a great sledding and tobogganing hill. A few well-placed trees at the bottom added that element of fear that made riding down the hill a cross between fun and terror. I was always cold by the time we had walked back behind the house, over the stream, across the bean field, and up the hill. It was fun, but always just a hair away from horrifying. Many days we would be back there, and I would be just settling in and having fun, and old Mr. Wallace would get out his buckshot and start shooting. Dad always said, "Oh, don't worry, he's shooting up warning shots, not at you." It was little consolation for my worried mind. We would always brave out a few more runs and then leave, walking home with our boots packed full of snow and our bellies empty. I loved it when Robert went because he could pull us home on the sled. Mother would make us hot chocolate upon returning, and that would always soothe my soul for a while. By now, my oldest brother, Richard, was returning from college and was teaching in the high school at the other end of the building. Our cooks could still cook a real meal, and he would come by and carry me to the cafeteria while these wonderful aromas would waft down the hall. I would be starving by lunch. Those were really happy moments. Many in school believed my brother was my father. I had girlfriends that knew better but would perpetuate this myth. It actually did make more sense as my dad was already in his mid-50s. About then, things were really heating up with my rebellious sister Marilyn. Jane you could hardly hear a peep from, but Marilyn was screaming to be heard. Robert was dropped off at college, and I mean dropped off. Dad hardly slowed down. I had worn my special snowflake dress with a black velvet jacket and was envisioning seeing his room with all the commotion of everyone moving in. I was so excited. But old Dad, he had other plans. He pulled up out front of Robinson's dorm, and Robert got out with one lone bag, and Dad pulled away. I was on my knees looking out the back window, and I will never forget the foreign look on Robert's face. I told him once that I would never forget, and he turned and said to me, "Neither will I." Then it was just us girls at home. Marilyn insisted that Mother give up her empty rooms kept for the boys and let us have a bedroom of our own. There was a big fight, but Marilyn won and she moved downstairs. This left Jane and me alone upstairs in 2 bedrooms. I was out of the crib, but not by much. Years later in college, the conversation turned to losing teeth. I said that when I lost a molar, afraid I had swallowed it, my dad sent me upstairs to search my crib. My friend just sat there staring at me. "What?" Helen said. "How old are you when you lose molars?" I was like, 7, maybe 8. Man, I can be thick. Mother crammed us girls into 1 bedroom with me still in the crib to save 2 bedrooms for the boys. Yes, the boys. All hail the boys.